Good evening. My name is Pastor Kathy Light, and I am the pastor here at Elm Street Congregational Church. And welcome to our second edition of A Story, Tell Me a Story, Jacob and His Wives. We started this study last week. It's online. You can check it out after we're done with tonight. These only take about 20 minutes. And last week we met Jacob. He is the twin of Esau, and he steals his brother Esau's birthright, and then he's frightened and he runs away, and he goes to his uncle Laban's, and he meets his uncle Laban's daughter, his cousin Rachel. He falls in love. He makes a deal to marry her, and there's some trickery involved. And we read that story from last week. And this week we're ready to move on to the next part of the story. But before we do, one of the things I had asked you to think about doing was to add to the story. Okay, so the stories that we have in the Bible are oftentimes very bare bones. And there is a lot of space, a lot of missing information, a lot of places where we can tell stories about what we think might have happened. And oftentimes these are kind of Rorschach testy, but it's to do that. It's actually called Midrash, and it is part of the Jewish tradition of trying to fill in the holes of Scripture. And tomorrow night, I'm actually going to start a series called The Legends of the Bible. And this is stories in Genesis. And the first story will be about Adam and Eve and the thing that happens as told from the point of view of the winds. The east wind, west wind, south wind, and north wind. So there are some things that I had asked you to do when thinking about being creative with this story. And one was a picture book. And I'm still trying to decide whether I want to do very abstract figures. So this would be a figure for male, and this would be a figure for female. And I have these little kind of ovals for sheep, and that'd be very abstract. And I'm still not sure how to go about doing that yet. So I'm working on that. But I also thought about writing stories from the different characters' points of view. And I thought about you could write them in journals. So Laban could have a journal. Jacob could have a journal. Leah, Rachel, Zilpah, and Bilhah could all have journals. You might even have journals for the children. But to take a few of these so that you can see the story from a particular point of view. So you can decide in your journal whether Laban is really very, very tricky and kind of Loki-like. You can decide if Leah is jealous and therefore exhibits other negative behaviors, or perhaps she understands what it's like to be jealous, so she is kinder to other people. There are many different ways we could go with those stories. So I wanted you to think about those things and how that you might be able to fill in some of the holes of the story. Because when we only get a frame story, we actually miss the humanity of the people in them. And one of the things that we notice, especially in the Genesis story, is that God is not always there fixing the day or saving the day or making things better for everybody, but that people have real trials and tribulations in their lives. Not everybody's life works out to the best, but how can everybody find their best in the life that they have? And so this is one of the ways that we can look at human lives. The other thing is that we're going to move on now from all the baby period, the baby making period is at least 7 years, because that is the agreement between Jacob and Laban. He worked for 7 years. He got tricked into marrying Leah. Then she had her wedding week. And then he got to marry Rachel, who he loved. And then he had to work for another 7 years. So at least 7 years has to pass, because the story that we get today is the story of him wanting to have his freedom. So let me read you the text today. It comes from Genesis chapter 30, verses 25 to 43, and it's from the NRSV version. Jacob prospers at Laban's expense. When Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away, that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go. For you know very well the service I have given you." But Laban said to him, "If you will allow me to say so, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it." Jacob said to him, "You yourself know how I have served you, and how your cattle have fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household?" He said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything if you will do this for me. I will again feed your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and such shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer me later when you come to look into my wages with you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen." Laban said, "Good, let it be as you have said." But the day Laban moved the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob was pasturing the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took fresh rods of poplar and almond and plane, and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the whites of the rods. He set the rods that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the rods, and so the flocks produced young that were striped, speckled, and spotted. Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and completely black animals in the flock of Laban. And he put his own droves apart and did not put them back with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob laid the rods in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the rods. But for the feebler of the flock, he did not lay them there. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger were Jacob's. Thus the man grew exceedingly rich, and had large flocks, and male and female slaves, and camels and donkeys. Now, this sounds like a lot of trickery is going on. First, Laban takes out all the spotted, and he sends them away so they can't breed for Joseph. And then Joseph, he takes these sticks for whatever reason, and he peels them so the sticks are striped, and he puts them in front of the sheep with the watering trough, and the sheep that breed in front of these striped sticks produce striped and spotted offspring. Now, that's interesting, because as a girl growing up in Lancaster County, that's not how it works. So we have to think that there's something in this story, some kind of magic that's happening that is causing this to work out. And we also know that since Laban uses the word divination, the way we think about divination today and divination back then apparently was perfectly acceptable. And divination might necessarily mean reading tea leaves. It might mean that I have discerned the following, right? So instead of divination, we might say discernment. We don't know. But in a pre-scientific society, anything that wasn't explainable was magic. And before we all go writing Harry Potter in the Harry Potter and Jacob and his 12 Rides, which might actually be an interesting book to read, we could do time travel and everything. It would be great. We should think about how Jacob sets up his own wealth. And we're going to visit next week how he escapes because once Laban sees how wealthy Jacob has become, he's not necessarily going to be a happy camper. Anyway, so when we're looking at this story, in the process of the Jacob story, so Jacob runs away from Esau. He goes to Laban. He makes a deal for Rachel. He gets tricked into marrying Leah. He has to do another whole 7 years. So he spends 14 years of his life. So if he was 20 when he got there, he was 34 when he left. And he's ready to be his own man, to go home, maybe to face up to what he's done. We'll have to see. But if you're writing this about, if you're writing the stories from a particular point of view, write the story from Laban's point of view with, I'm going to trick Jacob by taking all the spotted and the striped or colored animals out as far away so that they're not even in his possession. I'll leave him all the white ones and they'll all breed white babies, right? And that's not what happens. So, because we know from genetics that you have chromosomes from each side and that sometimes they're dominant, sometimes they're recessive, and I won't go into all that because that would bore you to tears. But what we find is that Jacob sets up a way for him to get, the majority of the sheep who are being born. So another thing that we might look at these stories is we might look about the ethics and morals of these characters. Was it ethical for Laban to trick Jacob into marrying Leah? Is it ethical or moral for Jacob to set up these rods for the sheep to breed in front of? Is it ethical or moral that Laban should have taken out all of the striped and spotted lambs and goats so that they wouldn't be part of the population that Jacob would get? So these stories, where there are ancient stories, they are also stories of today. So when we think about ethics and morals, one of the things that we need to think about is, how do our ethics and morals work out today? Do we have a little Jacob and a little Laban in us? Do we do things just to maybe favor ourselves a little more? And these are all things that we need to ponder and think about. I am so glad that you have joined me today, and I look forward to continuing this story with you. So we have themes to look at. Trickery is a theme, freedom is a theme, servitude is a theme. Not having much say in your life or being pawns in someone else's story is a theme, because we know that Bilhah and Zilpah, that's not her right name, Zilpah, have no choice, right? They have no choices. They just have to do what they're told. If you've been watching The Handmaid's Tale, you could read more into this story from that book. A series, I think now it's on Hulu. So I invite you all to enter this story, to find a place where you can explore the characters, the ethics, the morals, and that you can start to fill in those blanks yourself. That you can, and it is making up, but it's bringing a more fuller understanding of humanity, if not of these characters. So I invite you to join me next week and Tuesday, when we will do the next exciting chapter, which is when Jacob flees Laban's household. I think his wife's even still stuff. I have to wait and see. So we have even more ethical and moral things to talk about. And join me tomorrow night for Lily Freehoff's Bible Legends, an introduction to Midrash, and we'll see how the rabbis have been doing just what I've described, filling in those holes for 1,500 years. And it's interesting to see how other people view the text and how other people understand the things going on in their own world, in their own worldview. And we are invited in Every time we read the Bible, we are invited in to discover not only what's in the text, but what is in us. Would you pray with me? Holy Father, the creator of all that is, bring us to your text. Help us to see what you need us to see. Help us to be enriched and enlivened, and be with us each day on our journey toward better discipleship in Jesus Christ. Amen. So don't forget to stay tuned tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. May you all have a blessed evening. Good night.